Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a special guest here today. We have Brian here. Keep watching the video because we are going to deep dive into his beautiful, aggressive, insane build. Just wanted to start off and ask, what got you into cars?
I was one of those kids with a Countach on his wall, you know, so it's always Lamborghinis over Ferraris. I was very fortunate that my uncle used to run an import-export business with exotic cars. I was 17, 18. I managed to get the 1974 Lamborghini Urraco off him. It was kind of a car that was left over from when the business closed down. It was just sitting outside, sort of like neglected. It took a few years, but I convinced him to let me have that. And that sort of kick-started everything.
With people who don't know, what is the difference between a MRS and a MR2?
They're all technically MR2s. So it started with the AW11, the really angular one in the 80s. And then you had the SW20, the turbo one in the 90s. And this is sort of like the third generation MR2. In Japan, they called the MRS and a few other markets. Locally here, they're actually called the MR2 Spyder. And in the UK, they're called the MR2 Roadster. What
made you decide this was a car to go all in with and build it to how it is today?
It depends how far back we go, I guess. Sort of always this obsession with mid-engine cars. I had the opportunity to buy an SW20 off a very good high school friend of mine. Yeah. And that was the second car I ever owned. And I drove that for a long time. I raced that as well. I had a, slightly built motor. I actually crashed that in sort of the interlude of trying to find another nice SW20. I came across this, well, not this car, the one before this, BZZT V1, which was another yellow MRS. It was narrow body, like stock body. It was already turboed when I found it. Again, it was actually another high school friend's car, but he had sold it to someone else and it had sort of disappeared from all our peripheries. This guy also had SW20s, and at the time I was working on a lot of SW20s. We happened to meet and he wanted some help with his cars, and I went to his house. In his backyard sat that car. It's a turbo MRS, like how many can there be? Yeah. And sure enough, we checked the paperwork, it was my mate's car. I was like, well, if you're not going to do anything with it, I'm rescuing. So that's how it started with MRSs. It sort of was never on the radar. Like, if you're an SW20 guy, all the MR2 guys will know this, like you just hate MRSs for some unknown reason. It's like, oh, they're ugly or they don't have a turbo. Well, this fixed the first thing and body kit fixes the second thing. I sort of contemplated not getting back into it, but I had a good motor and no car this time. So what do? You get a sick car. So we bought another shell. It was sort of like tail end of COVID. I found one that had like a really rattly motor. So chucked that out, stuck this in, and I was like, well, what do you do to make it better? Wide body. And then we're here, I guess.
Touched a little bit about the car, so I think that's a perfect time to start diving deep into his build. So let's go. First thing I want to deep dive into is the exterior because it's very eye-popping. Tell us a bit about the wide body, because I know a lot of work has to go into wide body a car.
Absolutely, yeah, and more work than I imagined as well. So I found this kit on Facebook Marketplace. I think it came from over east. It's a fairly popular kit for an MRS overseas. We don't really have them in WA. I think there's none. Basically, it's a clone of the GT300 car from the early 2000s. But on an MRS, like the rear fenders bolt off. So luckily that you don't have to do an over fender. It's a whole panel that you replace.
Who manufactures this body kit?
There's a couple of different manufacturers, but the most popular one, I think Monocraft in Japan, made this kit originally, and there's been variants of it copied by other manufacturers.
I see the huge wing. Is that a custom wing or is that like
no? So that's an off-the-shelf wing. Okay. That's an NRG 69 inch, I think, for the memes. Yeah, it's a 69-inch wing. It's actually the same wing I had on V1, and it was way too wide for the body. But I measured it. And it was perfect for this body, so I thought, why not? Just a throwback to the old build. And it's sitting on a chassis mount upright. Yep. That kit's made by this guy in the US, Stingray Resto Mods. Okay. He's sort of stopped producing them himself now, and a company called Boosted Fabrications still makes them. Wing's actually just hanging on there by 2 bolts at the moment because the NRG mounts don't line up with the uprights yet. You'll notice there's like a spacer between the wing and the upright as well. I've sort of left some room in there because I want to make that wing active.
Yeah.
So I've got actuators in the shed somewhere. We'll go and try and make that work with braking and accelerating and, you know, move up and down and stuff.
It's a Porsche.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we'll get into that when we go in the engine, but this thing has a higher power to weight than a GT3 RS.
Wow.
Yeah.
How light is this car?
With the stock body, it was just over a ton, so about 1050 or 1020, depending on how full the fuel tank was.
Oh my god.
So yeah, they're very light cars, and I think that's one of the biggest draw cards.
Yeah.
The weight balance and the actual weight itself being so low.
I see you have the Workmaster S1s.
Yes. I ordered these when I was putting this car together. Honestly, I was trying to find a wheel that was 4x100 still, because I didn't want to mess with hubs yet.
Yeah.
And would fill the guards on this thing, which were freaking huge. And I did some math and sort of eyeballing, and this came up and it was close. Turns out not close enough. We've got, I think, 25 mil space on the back of that. It wanted 0 offset. This is a plus 25, and I had a different set of wheels that I almost clicked on, and I should have gone with that one. But anyway, we'll buy another set of wheels. I might go 18s.
Yep.
Just to fill out the arches a bit better.
Yep.
But these are 17s. 9 wide in the back and 8s in the front. The trouble with the really high cutouts in the GT300 kit is that the car has to be really low for the wheels to look like they belong in that space. But then you risk the sump and the chassis and everything else. You know the low car life. Like.
What brake setup have you got?
Mitch's Auto Part. So they originally developed that front brake kit first. 4 pots in the front. They actually fit under the stock wheels. So if you got a stock MRS, that will squeeze under there.
Yeah,
it was designed for that.
Wow.
Now they look a little bit undersized, but you know what? They work really well. The rear is a 4-pot main with a spot caliper that's separate. So it's a twin caliper.
And are those 2-piece rotors?
Yes, they are. So it's a custom hat machined for this car, and the rotor's off the shelf. Luckily, it uses the same rotor front and back.
Really?
Yeah, so you can, because of the almost 50-50 weight balance. The rest of the body kit is sort of made up of the doors are stock. It's probably one of the only bits that are stock on the car. But the front bonnet is a Sabon carbon bonnet, the vented one. The rear one is a C1 Motorsport Japan. I think it's long discontinued. Managed to find that on Yahoo Auctions, I think.
I know there's something special about the carbon, if you want to tell us about it.
It's a long story, but basically the front and back, everyone says it's green, but it's not. I promise you. So it's actually the base color of the car tinted over the carbon, so you can still see the weave through it. That was something that I wanted the paint shop to experiment with when I saw some of the tinted carbon stuff online.
You can see the car's pretty much track oriented. A bit of street drivability, comfort, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Right now it's sort of a little bit not assembled. Usually I like to keep my interiors quite stock. I'll have a full glove box, center console, door cards, like it'll be a complete car still inside.
Nice.
The only part that's not really complete is the back, but that's because the half cage sort of doesn't let you put a lot of the stuff back in. This is an AGI half cage. It was available, not too expensive. Considering I rolled the last car, it's probably for the best that I've got a half cage in this thing.
So what's your shifter setup? Is that a short shifter?
It's very short. This is a race shifter made by some guy in Germany, I think. There's a few guys that make aftermarket shifters for this car. I'm not super pleased with the build quality, but it works. I made it work. So this car still has full AC. AC, heat, everything still works. Power steering is electric, hydroelectric, so it's got a hydraulic system, but it doesn't run off the engine. It's got an electric motor in the front. The steering ratio is really tight on these, and that's actually the first thing that sold me about this car when I test drove it for the first time.
Yep.
Handled so exactly like what I wanted my SW to handle like. Seats, I've been running this Cobra Suzuka for a while now. This was in my previous car as well. Behind you actually is the Elite 1500 that runs everything.
Nice.
And the wideband control module behind that as well. The stock ECU is actually still in the car, only to run the dash.
Right, smart.
Yeah,
That's
so
really smart.
I didn't want to go to the digital dashes.
Yep.
It's just a bit too race car for me. I actually have a set of custom gauges on a stock cluster that's inside at the moment. I haven't installed them, but a yellow background with the Ferrari style tachometer.
Oh,
you know?
nice.
Yeah. But yeah, I didn't want a digi dash, so small price to pay. Have the stock ECU running just the dash. It's some Toyota proprietary signal that I have. Well, I'm sure we could replicate it with some kind of Arduino control or something.
Yeah,
but,
fair.
it already works, so why mess with? We're running the stock ECU as the piggyback, if you think about it, which is weird.
Wow, that is...
Yeah, so the stock ECU is the piggyback now.
Very, very interested into your suspension and how you set up your suspension.
Suspension is one of those things that literally you can shave seconds off your lap time. First, we've got a set of Shockworks coilovers in there. They're an Australian brand, really reputable. They have every bit of the same quality as something like an Olin's, I would say. They're really nice coilover. We've got a T3, so Techno Toy tuning. So all that orange stuff is all T3. Everything's adjustable. Even in the front, you can adjust up to 25 mil offset.
Oh, wow.
Just for free.
Wow.
So wheel size don't even matter anymore in the front. It's crazy. And the bits that are not in there yet, there's some, bolts that don't have anything on them. There's a whole set of braces that go under this car. Breastplate and sort of like a ladder brace for both the rear and the front. Being a convertible, they're quite relatively soft chassis, so they flex a bit. The roll cage would have helped with that as well. The best way to make a convertible more rigid is get a full 6-point or more roll cage, and that will be the hard top basically. Without going that far, you just brace the underneath, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Just to minimize flex through the chassis. The front fender wells have fender braces underneath them as well, so that stops the actual suspension towers in the front flexing up. And both the front and back have these tubular bash bars. They were also made by Stingray Resto Mods. Now Boosted Fabrications does them too. It's this wing pylon kit, as they call it, the wing struts. They're built to fit that rear crash bar. The front one has one behind the bumper in a similar style as well, and that was built to have sort of front splitter mounts bolted into them as well. It's all part of a set for Aero, making space for the exhaust tips to come out the middle. One thing that you might pick up on is that, or maybe you didn't pick up on, is that subframe is actually aftermarket as well. That subframe is a recent development by this guy called Paul Woods of Woodsport in the UK. Now Woodsport has been around for decades, since AW11s and SW20s. They are the pioneer for doing crazy engine swaps in MR2s. They used to swap the 3S turbo motor into the AW11, and then they developed the V6 conversions for the SW20 and the AW11, and then they developed the V6 conversion for this chassis, which I talked to him about, but he said for what I want to use, the V6 is kind of a bit heavy, and if you can hit your 400, 500, 600 horsepower in a 4-cylinder, you're saving weight no matter what. This is actually number 2, but it's the first production subframe. 001 being the prototype. He should have labeled it 000 so that I could have 001. But anyway, that's the first one that was ever made. Give him some feedback on a few things that needed to get adjusted before the rest of the production went through. So this one's actually slightly different to the other ones that went through. But yeah, so we've got adjustable mounting locations for the rear control arms, and that just corrects for sort of the suspension geometry going out of whack when you lower the car too far. The suspension thinks you're still at a certain higher ride height, but it's dumb. I think the bottom notch is where the stock location is. In the worst case scenario, if everything doesn't work out, just slap it back to the stock location and it works like a stock one. Most people don't even think about changing the subframe unless you're tube chassising a drift car or something.
Man, this rear is insane. All the things that you have done to the suspension, I can only imagine what you've done to the engine.
I can't really take credit for building the engine, the short block, that was built by WTF Auto. They know what they're doing. Tristan's one of the best tuners in Perth, in my opinion. Race proven for, a hard 3-4 years. 2 race wars, multiple Albany hill climb sprints, and I auto carned it for every other month. Still the stock motor, 1.8 litre 4-cylinder 1ZZ FE. Aftermarket pistons, rods and cams. It's got a 5.0 Ignite ignition system on it now. 5.0 Ignite is a local company, by the way, if you don't know about them.
Okay.
5.0 Ignite, they're based out of Perth. They do ignition kits, trigger kits for everything you want. SR20, RB. We've got a radium fuel rail in there with, they used to be 1000cc injectors. They're 1250 now. Because at Racewars, we were running out of fuel on the top end. Would sit on limiter halfway through the 800 meter run. And that was 240k an hour, 7,800 RPM. And it sat on limiter for the next half of the run, 400 meters worth.
Wow.
And it didn't care. It did the 800 meter run quicker than an R35 GTR did, and I stopped accelerating halfway down the track because I ran out of gears.
Wow.
Yeah, got a custom exhaust manifold that I've had remade a few times now because they tend to crack with abuse.
Okay.
Turbo manifold, that goes into a Garrett, now it's a Garrett GTX 2860 Gen 2. We are pushing it a little bit. We run a touch over 26 to 28 pounds of boost. Almost no spool time. By the time you're on gate, a turbo V8 would still be spooling, you know? Like an RB would still be spooling. There'll still be 2-3 seconds behind you and you've gone half the quarter mile.
Yeah. That is crazy.
Yeah, it's just a response car, I think. That's what I like in a car. That's how I like to drive as well. This exhaust was made maybe 2 weeks ago. Good friend of mine, Lindsay Wood, he is a hobbyist, but an amazing fabricator. I could not imagine this to be more perfect than it is. Like, it's amazing. It's all Ben Brothers elbows. We've got the Varix valve and just a vibrant resonator. On the intake side, we've got a classic Blitz blow-off valve that I've had forever, and that goes into a Plasma Man water-to-air intercooler with custom end tanks to fit that space exactly, so I don't have to use any weird bendy couplers and shit. It's just straight into the intake manifold there and straight to the turbo on this side, you know? So like, it's built for that space. The cooler has its own coolant circuit, so it's got a temp sensor in there. It has 2 pumps now. I used to only run 1 pump, so it's got 2 electric water pumps, one at the back, one at the front. And we're running one of anti-gravity's lithium batteries. The original battery sort of sits facing that way. Sort of extends up to there, but because we had the water to air stuff, we rotated it and tucked it into the fuse box a little bit more. So this has the first ever Rust Performance Racing damper on the front of it now, so the crank pulley, because they were tied to WTF Auto for a while, managed to get a word in. It's like, hey, can you make this one for this range? And it actually fits the 1ZZ and the 2ZZ. Engine vibrations is so much less insane with that damper on it. The gearbox is tucked in there pretty tight. It's a stock casing 5-speed gearbox. It has the 3rd and 4th gear upgrade from Hollinger. All the other gears in the gearbox, like the gearbox is stripped completely. And every other gear, including the ring gear, the shafts, everything was both isotropic finished and cryo-treated. A lot of people say like cryo-treating's a bit of voodoo, like, you know, you can't really measure how much better a part gets. The only thing you can measure is 1, it stops breaking, or 2, in the mining industry, some of the companies actually cryo-treat their stuff, like gearboxes in their big trucks and stuff, and they see up to, you know, double, triple the lifespan. And that's proof enough. Like, the thing works. It's just hard to measure how much it works. Because you're talking about like crystalline grain structures in the metal. Like, that's, you know, how do you measure that besides cutting it open? And inside we've got a Cusco 1.5 way LSD as well. Just to, you know, you've got to have an LSD. So for that transmission, we've got a transmission cooler. Now this transmission cooler setup is one that I designed from scratch. I don't think anyone had made it before, and in any case I didn't reference any. No, it needed a cooler, and in SW20s the gearboxes have an internal oil pump, so it pumps the oil around for circulation, and it actually has a cooler loop built in. This thing, not so easy. I basically use the drain and fill ports for the inlet and outlet for the cooler. It runs through an electric VDO oil pump, a gear oil pump, and then circulates through a cooler and goes back in through the fill port. I chose to mount it at the bottom of the car because, first of all, it's a really cramped engine bay space, and you can try and tuck it into the side vents, but really only that one is useful on the right side. This left side has the filler neck and all sorts of stuff in there. just not a good space. In the stock factory under tray, it was in front of where there was a cutout to cool the gearbox, like by passive air cooling, like flowing over the gearbox. So that cooler sits right in front of that opening.
Wow.
So it's like made for that space almost. So when I put it all together, it all sort of like came together really nicely without much of a challenge. And then on the topic of coolers, we've got one more. This one is now the engine oil cooler. There is some custom ducting that had to go inside.
What your horsepower torque numbers are?
This motor ran in the previous build, dynoed at just a touch under 400 wheel horsepower, and torque is around 325 foot-pounds, I think.
Wow, in just over a 1-ton car? That is ridiculous.
Like I mentioned earlier, like this thing makes more power to weight than the current GT3 RS, which is fun to think about. I've yet to line one up on the freeway to find out for sure.
Oh, that would be a good race.
That would be a fun race, yeah. But don't street race, sorry, I'd never do that.
Thank you so much to Brian. Go follow him on
BZZT_JGTC on Instagram.
Go ahead and follow him and keep up to date with this build because it's not done yet. I'm excited to see where this car goes. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and thank you so much to Brian for allowing us to deep dive into his beautiful build. As always, click that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Man. Appreciate it.